My name's Tom Place, this is Chasing Cars, and with me today is a vehicle that has been in my garage for the past 3 months, the Ford Mustang Mach-E Premium. Now, this is certainly not the first fully electric vehicle that's been on the Chasing Cars long-term fleet. In fact, we've got another one on the go as well right now in Hyundai's newly released Kona Electric. And there's a good reason for that. See, there's a lot of Aussies out there, myself included to a certain degree, which are looking at EVs and wondering how, or in fact, if they might be able to integrate them into their lives into the coming years. And it's for that reason that we've really been looking into these vehicles and see how their merits stack up as a day-to-day proposition. Now, I've never actually lived with an EV on a full-time basis before, and that's made the last 3 months particularly enlightening, because I've been getting to know not just what the Mach-E is like to live with every day, but also what it's like to live with an EV more broadly in Australia in 2024 as our infrastructure starts to progress. Now, in today's video, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about what it's like to live with this vehicle every day, how practical it is, what the wear and tear situation is like, and just how many kilometers we'll be able to squeeze out of a single charge of this vehicle. As we take you through all of that in our 5 hits and 5 misses as we reach our end of our tenure with this vehicle. And we've got a lot to cover there, so for that reason we've decided to break this up into 2 separate videos, the latter of which is coming to your screens very, very soon. Now, before we get started on today's video, please don't forget to like and comment down below, and also subscribe if you want to catch that second video and join us on our way to 200k. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. So let's talk about our first hit for the Mach-E, and this one came as a bit of a surprise to me, if I'm perfectly honest, and that is the interior. Over time, I've actually grown to love this interior more and more, certainly more than I initially thought I would. You know, looking at it from a glance, you see that it's got a nice interior design. It's all very clean, all very presentable. I still really love the integration of the B&O stereo system up here, and the stereo itself also sounds really quite good and has been great to listen to every day with both music and podcasts. But I think the thing that surprised me the most has been this touchscreen. It controls absolutely everything, including the climate controls, and I'm sure you've heard me whinge about this before in other cars. And look, I don't think it's as good as physical buttons still, but I think it gets pretty close, if I'm perfectly honest. And that's because instead of having just a touch functionality for controlling the temperature and things like that, Ford has gone for a bit of a half-half approach on this. I'll explain that now. So let's say you want to adjust the temperature here. You start the process by just pressing plus here or minus if you so wish, and then it brings up a variable wheel. From there, you can turn it to your preferences. And for me, that kind of changes the situation, because what I don't like about integrating climate control and other functions into the touchscreen is it keeps your focus fixed on this touchscreen for a significant period of time. Whereas if I just press this button here and then I can move my hand to the scroll wheel, I can now divert my attention back to the road where it should be. So ultimately, I do think that is a great compromise from having full physical buttons, which seems to be going out of fashion and manufacturers don't really seem to like, unfortunately, and full touchscreen integration. So well done, Ford there. I will say though, they should not have combined it with a rotary shifter. Can you see where I'm going here? So look, I might just be an idiot, but so are a lot of the people on the roads. And you know, when I get home from work every day, I have to reverse in. So what do? I go in there and I position the vehicle like so, and I do 2 things. I turn down the volume of my music and I put the car into reverse. And there has been, look, I'm going to say a few times as early as this morning as well when I have gone to do the wrong one. And it's a little bit embarrassing and it's a little bit unfortunate, but surely I can't be the only one. It just seems to be a little bit of an odd situation to combine those 2. Give us one or the other, Ford, not both at the same time. But going back to the touchscreen for just a second, I have really quite enjoyed this. It's a nice crisp screen, and the incoming facelift that we've seen in the States that we're going to expect to see in Australia some point in 2025 is going to see some improvements here, but I don't really think it needs that many, to be perfectly honest. I think it works fairly well. It's nice and crisp, nice and bright, and the portrait orientation is particularly good for navigation, because once you have the screen up, you can see what's coming far ahead of you, unlike on a landscape screen where you don't really have much headroom in what's coming up ahead unless you zoom out. So nice little usability feature there. It's also great having an additional display up here for the speed. Another little slight negative about this interior is the fact that we only have one phone charger here. Really strange decision. I don't know why Ford has decided to do that. Essentially copied Tesla, but done it badly in that we've got space for two phones here, but only one of them charges. Really strange move, that one. We've got a little bit of storage in the front here, but not a whole heap, I must say. We've got some underneath our phone charging section here and a little bit in the doors, but I've personally had a bit of a hard time trying to get a reasonable bottle to fit in there properly. But ultimately, I do think that is just a bit of a minor negative when it's overall a pretty good interior space. While we're on the topic of potential improvements and wish list though, boy, I'd love if Ford just put that fantastic folding steering wheel from the Transit Custom into the Mach-E. That'd be fantastic, especially beneficial for those long charging sessions. I could just have my laptop here, I could do some work or just watch some movies to entertain myself. Or better yet, maybe integrate something like Netflix into the touchscreen like we do see some other rivals doing. That brings me to my next point though, which is a great hit for this vehicle, and that is build quality and wear and tear. Now, I think this is a good thing to touch on when it comes to legacy brands, because we do see a lot of upstarts in this area, which their quality control isn't quite as good. Now, this has got about 10,000 Ks on it, about 4,000 of which I have done myself, and I've been fairly impressed with how well this interior has held up. We don't see any signs of really wear on the door here, and even though a lot of the leather and the seats and things like that are actually pretty soft, I'm not seeing much collapsing on the sides of the doors or indeed on the sides of the seat here. So I've been pretty impressed with that as well. There's also just some fundamental things, like some especially good design on things like drainage of the rear hatch. I don't know if any of you have ever opened up the tailgate after it's been raining and it's just dumped water on your head as you reach in to get something. But you know, simple things like having it drain down the side there, nice and easily. It's just a little understated bit of engineering. But little things like that do matter when you own a vehicle like this long term. That's not to say there's no signs of wear in this interior. The rotary shifter, for example, here, building on my unfortunate dislike for it, it does feel a little bit too loose, I think. Jumping in the other Mach-E that we have here today, it does feel definitely a bit more tighter, and that car is much newer, and there have been times when I've actually overshot the gear that I want to get into, so definitely a potential point of improvement. However, it hasn't been all smooth sailing for the Mach-E, so let's jump in the back seat and talk about that. Jumping into the back seat now, we reach our first major miss for this vehicle, and that is its general practicality, and that starts in the back here of the vehicle. So look, there are some good points to this experience. For example, the seats are fairly soft, though not quite as soft as the front seats. I have a good amount of headroom, good amount of knee room, good amount of toe room, though you will notice that my knees do sit up fairly high and they're just kind of flailing about here. They're not very supportive and they wouldn't be all that great on a long trip. And that's unfortunately just a casualty of the fact that the 91 kilowatt hour battery, which is absolutely massive, has just got to go somewhere, and they've put it under the floor here, and that does unfortunately eat into your knee space and support. So that's a little bit unfortunate. I also just can't get over how bad the air vent placement is in this car. Like if I have my legs positioned naturally, I can't even see them because my knee blocks my sight of them, let alone feel any kind of air coming off them on my face. It just gives me a cold knee. Not very good design at all. Really, if it was going to be this bad and this close to the floor, like it's genuinely below the height of the seat here, they should have just integrated it up here into the roof or something like that where it's actually going to be useful. Now, as I said, there are some good bits in terms of dimensions to this back seat, so you do have a good amount of length, and that has allowed me to fit a rearwards facing baby seat in here fairly easily. But unfortunately, it has a pretty small aperture when it comes to the back seat opening, particularly due to this slant here that we've got, and that is just unfortunately a symptom of the fact that this is a coupe-shaped SUV. So if you've got some little tackers and you're wanting to get them in and out of baby seats, it's definitely something to consider, because I was having a little bit of a fight for my life trying to get them in and out every day, and that definitely does put a little bit of extra strain on your back. And that brings me to my last point, and that is unfortunately my hatred of the fact that we have a fixed panoramic sunroof here with no closable blind. It's really, I think, a bit of a disappointing decision from Ford, and I think it's also an obvious cost-cutting mechanism from them as well. Like, why can't we have a window shade here? Now, Ford was kind enough to provide me with the sunshade that they do provide, and it's actually really easy to slot in quite nicely, and it doesn't hang down like an AU Falcon headliner, and it all fits very nicely. But unfortunately, it's just not very good at being a sunblind. See, there's a good amount of tinting on here. There's also some UV protection, so from a sunburn situation, it should be fairly okay. But once you put in the blind, it doesn't really do blind things. It doesn't really make a significant difference to the amount of light that comes into the cabin. And look, you know, as I said, there is UV protection, but for me, who is particularly cautious about sun damage, nothing quite beats having a fixed roof or a proper blockout sunshade that zooms across the back here when you're not using it. So look, definitely some point for improvement there, or Ford, just give us the option to just have a fixed roof if we want it. So before we talk about the rear boot, which of course makes up most of the practicality, let's first talk about the front boot, because we've got an extra 134 extra litres here. And I was curious to see if I would actually use this during my time with the car. Now, to get to this space, it's a little bit interesting. So first of all, I've got to walk around to the passenger side of the car, open up the door like so, pull this lever twice, and we open it up like so. Very nice indeed, good amount of space, yada, yada, yada. However, an interesting quirk between the Premium and the GT is the fact that they actually have different keys. This one's more of their European style vehicles, and this one is taken from the Ranger/F-150. And to open this one is much more simple. Just double click this button here, and it opens like so. And you can open it up and access it quite easily. And I actually do think this is a bit of a meaningful difference between these two vehicles, and something that I do think that should trickle down the line. Because like many people out there, I'm a reverse parker, and I walk up to my car with my bag slung over my back or whatever cargo that I'm carrying at the time. And it's nice and easy to just press the button and dump stuff in and then jump in the front seat instead of putting things in the back seat or the boot, because ultimately I'm not going to walk around the car and then back to the front to put stuff in there. And unfortunately, that slight inconvenience has meant that I haven't really used that space much at all during my 3-month tenure. Coming around to the rear of the vehicle now, you find a crucial part of the practicality experience, which is of course the boot. Now, we do have a button to open the power tailgate of the rear hatch here, which is very nice indeed. Lifts up and out of the way. It's a good height too, I found. I'm 6 foot tall, and I'm not smacking my head into this like I do on so many cars out there. We've got about 400 litres of space here, and look, it's a good usable space for most purposes, I think. However, as a family man, I definitely have run into some limitations with this boot size. Once I get my pram in here, for example, not an especially huge pram either. I've only really got room for maybe 1 or 2 shopping bags, maybe some stuff wedged up along the edge here, but it really does take up a big bulk of the space here, just because the boot probably isn't as large as some others in this segment, unfortunately. There's also the fact that this is a coupe-shaped SUV, which means you do take a big slice off the top here. So if you've got taller items, it's a little bit more tricky, and you do have to fold your seats down to push them further in and out of the way. Otherwise, they simply are just going to smash into that glass there, and that's not very nice indeed. I will say I do have some compliments for this boot space though. 12-volt socket, nice tie down points, they've been very useful. And also this little window shade here, you know, some people might have a go at that for being flimsy and cheap, but I actually think that's really good because of the way it's able to bend and stretch around objects while still having great coverage to keep your things in the boot nice and hidden from prying eyes. So the next miss is the topic of driver independence, or perhaps just the lack thereof, and that begins with the lack of a spare tyre of any kind in the Mach-E, in a really disappointing trend for EVs more generally. Now, this one has a claimed range of 600 kilometres, and to me it strikes as a little bit of an odd matchup when you're making a car that's capable of road tripping, but then takes away the spare wheel, which you're likely to need if you're travelling long distances. Now, the next element of this lack of driver independence is to do with the door handles. Now, like many vehicles, the Mach-E has a fully electric system, which means that I press the button here, it sends power from the 12-volt battery and opens like so. Now, a lot of people aren't going to like that on principle. Personally, I've gotten used to it, even if I had over a few disagreements or times when it was a bit laggy. I don't particularly mind, I'm used to it now, that's fine. What I don't like about it is the fact that there is no physical key barrel style fail-safe in the event that the 12-volt battery goes flat. Now, I'm sure there's many warnings built into this system that will sound off if the 12-volt battery goes flat, but I've had many a car have a 12-volt battery go flat and dead on me all of a sudden, and that really quite concerns me, particularly as a parent. See, the idea of my kid getting stuck in the back here and the 12-volt battery going flat, and I'm having to find some sort of, way to get into the car is really disappointing. And the way to actually get into the car is quite convoluted. It requires you to go to the front bumper, pulling out some wires there, and then putting it on a battery pack to to pop the frunk. From there, you can get access to the 12-volt battery, which will then be recharged so you can open the doors. All of that takes time, and it's time that you simply don't have in the event that you're on a hot summer's day, and particularly given the fact that there's no window shade for the roof inside here. This car is going to heat up very quickly. As a parent, that really freaks me out, if I'm being quite honest. And sure, you can say just carry a jumper pack around with you in the event you have to use that, but where's that jumper pack? That jumper pack is in the boot here. So you've got to call someone or some sort of service to come out and help you. And that, for me, is just not good enough. And to show an example of how this is actually done right, we go over here to the Lexus LBX, which is the latest model to adopt the electronic door handle style system. But the key difference is you do actually have a physical key barrel to unlock and get these doors open in the event that the 12-volt battery goes flat. So it can be done properly, it's just not done properly on the Mach-E. Now, of course, Ford isn't the only car maker to be doing this in Australia. Tesla is also guilty of this. But, you know, I would really hope we don't see this as a growing trend in the coming years to do with EVs, because there's no reason we can't just have that physical backup. So what's it like to drive the Ford Mustang Mach-E Premium? Well, for the most part, I've got to say this is a big hit for this car. It's great in a lot of different ways, and that starts with just the athleticism of this car. I'm not going to say it's got the most talented chassis out there or it's the most fun out there, but for a car that's designed to, at its core, essentially just be an everyday vehicle, I think this is actually quite a fun thing to punt around. There's been many times where I found myself wanting to actually go drive this car over some of its other counterparts, which also include combustion cars out there, which I might normally flock to. So it's definitely a strong point for the Mustang. Now, there is a lot of debate on whether it should be called a Mustang or things like that, and I don't know. It's sort of a question that I don't think is ever going to be fully answered, but I do think it has its own identity in a way. It's not a sports car. It's definitely not a sports car, but for an everyday car, it is certainly a lot of fun. I think a lot of that is owing to the fact that this is rear-wheel drive in this configuration. 216 kilowatts of power and 430 newton meters of torque. It's not bad at all, and it's a good 18 kilowatts more than the base model, of course. And look, I can't say that there's a huge difference between those two models, but it's definitely appreciated having a little bit of extra grunt. The 0 to 100 time is about 6.2 seconds, and I certainly believe it. It's very sprightly and very fun. I think the proof in the fact that this is actually a nice car to drive is I've actually taken this out to some of my favorite B roads on several occasions, actually, just to go for a fun drive, not road testing purposes. So I think that really does speak for itself. I will say though that you do have to be a little bit careful sometimes when it comes to driving the Mach-E. The rear-wheel drive nature does make it very, very skiddy indeed. And if you're not careful and you chuck it in untamed mode, which seems to let go of the reins a little bit, you can find yourself doing a bit of an unsolicited skid when you're trying to get down the road without much fuss. And there have been some times in the wet, especially when I found myself catching a little bit of opposite lock when I wasn't necessarily wanting to do so. But if you're comfortable, you know, with a little bit of that driving behavior, it kind of goes towards a more positive aspect of the car. And I've certainly found myself at times being a little bit cheeky when driving this around town. And I won't say that for all the rivals in this class, which often have a bit of an understeer bias to the way they drive. I certainly prefer driving this. And honestly, driving a rear-wheel drive car is just so refreshing. You know, we only really have sports cars and high-end premium cars are rear-wheel drive nowadays. The vast majority of cars are either all-wheel drive with a heavy front bias or just front-wheel drive entirely. So it's one of those great hidden benefits of owning an EV, that you can have a rear-wheel drive car, which is good fun to drive as an everyday sort of vehicle. So that aspect has definitely been a huge positive for the Mach-E. On the complete other end of the spectrum when it comes to the driving experience, I will say that I have enjoyed commuting in this vehicle, and a good amount of that comes down to the fact that not just we have things like a nice stereo, you know, that cheeky rear-wheel drive nature, but also the well-tuned adaptive cruise control. I have a fairly straightforward commute that takes me home primarily on highway routes, but rarely doing highway speeds, such as life in Sydney, unfortunately. But the adaptive cruise control, which does have a great lane centering function and is also really great at modulating the distance from the vehicle in front and behind, is just so well tuned. I've been so impressed by it. In fact, there's been multiple times when I've been able to get pretty much all the way home and all the way to work and then do the same in fairly heavy traffic with aggressive drivers, pretty much without intervening at all. And I don't think I've ever done that in another vehicle before previously. So that has been a huge mark for the Mach-E. And the combination combination of having that silence from the electric motor, the nice stereo, and the well-tuned adaptive cruise control means that after a long day of work, you know, I don't have to be hyper-focused on what the car's doing, and I can just relax a little bit, and that is ultimately what those safety systems are trying to achieve. And it really has made me want to flock to this car if what I'm doing is just commuting. You know, it's not the sort of driving that any of us really like, but this car definitely has made that experience much better. That experience, however, does come with a but, and it's a bit of an annoying one, and that is the ride. I don't really think the ride in this car is particularly sorted. There's this term that's kicking around that we hear often, and it's called like, oh, it rides well for an EV. Oh, you know, like it's got good driving range for an EV. And I don't really believe in those terms. I think a car should ride good. It doesn't matter what drivetrain it has. And there's definitely a little bit of work to be done here. But I think that Ford was kind of putting themselves in a box a little bit when they decided to put a 91 kilowatt hour battery in this thing. It's absolutely enormous battery, and it contributes to a curb weight of over 2 tons. Now, remarkably, due to differences in battery chemistry, this actually has a overall lighter curb weight than the Select, which has a smaller size battery. And despite the fact that it has the overall, you'd say, lighter weight per kilowatt hour, it's unfortunately still not hugely comfortable. The ride can feel fairly fussy, and there are times when it just crashes up through the cabin, and that's really quite unfortunate. I note that it was particularly bad in the rear seats, so if you've got kiddos in the back, they're going to be doing a bit of complaining, unfortunately. Now, I've been fortunate enough to drive all 3 variations of the Mach-E during my tenure. I've driven the Select previously. That was a great bit of fun. It drives fairly similar to this, I will say. Of course, it's a little bit heavier, but I don't think that is hugely distinguishable when you're driving. But we've also had the Mach-E GT in this week, and we've actually been able to back-to-back the pair of them, and it's been very interesting to see how the two drive. This one is definitely the more fun of the pair, I think, certainly on public roads. The rear-wheel drive nature allows you to get it bent out of shape and have a little bit of fun, but you're not going to get yourself into trouble, you know, be that with the law or certainly spinning off the road. The Mach-E GT is just so fast. It is so fast. Really, I would love to take that on the track because you do hit the limits of public roads very, very quickly. And I do think in some respects that is a bit of a tick for this vehicle, but if you are going to go all in, it's certainly a lot of fun. And I really do hope that the rally version that they're developing as part of the facelift in the United States does make its way to Australia. Essentially, that just kind of bumps up the ride height a little bit, and it makes it a little bit more off-roady, a little bit more fun. And I think that might actually carve out a proper identity for the Mach-E GT, because at present, look, it's about $97,000, and you know, that is a lot of money, but it's also not too far off something like an Ioniq 5N, and that really has sorted itself as far as dynamics. And if it came push come to shove, I think I would rather spend a little bit extra money and go for the Hyundai. But nevertheless, in the Premium, you are getting a fun little car, and it's been one of my favorite parts of the experience. So it's good fun to drive, and it's got a nice interior, if perhaps not the most practical one, but that's certainly not all that we've learned in our 3 months together with the Mach-E. Coming up in our next installment, we're going to be talking about the sort of stuff that really does make or break EVs. Most notably is talking about how many kilometres we've been able to squeeze out of a single charge, and does it hit its 600 kilometre range claim. I'm also going to answer the question that I've been most interested to find out, in that have I been successful in topping up this car for my day-to-day duties just using a household 3-pin socket. We're also going to look at the question of value and ultimately reach our conclusion on whether this is a car I would welcome back to my driveway if my own cash was on the table. So if you want to catch all that, please don't forget to subscribe and comment down below, and also don't forget to give us a like. But for now, that's all. Thank you for watching Chasing Cars.